This is another one, because this is a question I get a lot in terms of like, what do you think about earning a yield on your Bitcoin or lending out your Bitcoin? So this is Lowry's thoughts on it. Says, in other words, I see a future where companies rent people's Bitcoin, offering yield as bait to entice them into giving up self-custody. And once enough Bitcoin is concentrated in these custodial entities, I see nations stepping in to nationalize that rented Bitcoin under the guise of strategic necessity. And this isn't just speculation, it's precedent. It's already happened. The probability that the US would seize an asset it deems strategically vital is not theoretical. It's 100% because history has already proven it. In 1933, the US government confiscated gold through Executive Order 6102, outlawing private ownership and forcing citizens to exchange their gold for fiat. The justification? Economic stability and national security. If Bitcoin becomes a global asset reserve or a neo form of gold, why wouldn't governments attempt the same playbook? The more Bitcoin is centralized in custodian institutions, the easier it will be to seize. It will only become more tempting and more politically popular to seize that Bitcoin with time. Sure, today it seems unconceivable, but in 20 years, when Bitcoin is worth 10 million per coin and 90% of people don't own even a tenth of a single coin, it will be a different story. The political majority will be the first to forfeit their fraction of a coin for 2x its current market value. So if you think about it, that's kind of what's happening right now. And I'm not going to lie, that scares me. Just like he said, today, it doesn't seem like it would be possible, right? We have a guy who's very crypto and Bitcoin friendly in the White House, which is the most influential building or office and administration in the world. So today, yes, this doesn't seem like a big problem, but in 20 years from now, when much more is at stake, that could be a different story. And I'm not saying it will be. I'm saying it's something that we need to think about. It's not a high probability, I don't think, but it's not zero. And so the best thing that you can be doing right now, essentially, is that you should be taking every possible step. Every single second you have in the day, you should be thinking about improving your Bitcoin security. And when you take those sats off an exchange, again, kind of going back to what we were talking about at the start here, every single sat that you buy and you take self-custody of is a sat that they will never have. The government will never have that. If you do it properly, MicroStrategy, BlackRock, the state of Texas, they will never get those sats. And there's only so many sats. They understand that. Unfortunately, the average person hasn't really understood that yet. But that's the whole game here. This isn't about earning like 2 or 3 fucking % of your Bitcoin and putting it at risk. Not only giving somebody else the keys to your Bitcoin, but exposing your privacy essentially. Because when you're lending Bitcoin, they know your UTXO, they know your balance, they hold a key to that. So it's not just a risk of losing it, but it totally eliminates all privacy that you otherwise would have. So the key here is taking Bitcoin into self-custody and taking it out of the hands, out of a possibility where this could happen. And so when you think about MicroStrategies, when you think about BlackRock, when you think of the rate that these big companies are accumulating these Bitcoin, how difficult would it be in a decade or two from now for the government to say, MicroStrategy has 500,000 Bitcoin? That's a big problem. We need to take that. So as a MicroStrategy holder at that point, what do? The government now holds your Bitcoin for the greater good? And I absolutely believe if this is something the government's like started thinking about and started preparing to do, I don't think they are right now, but if they did, they could definitely do this. Think back 4 years ago of how easily tricked people were into being scared of a flu. How easy they were tricked into turning on their family members and coworkers and friends. I absolutely think that if this were to play out down this road and the government's decided that we need to take this Bitcoin, it's a strategic, it's a security threat to our country. I 100% believe that like 80% of people would be on board for that. They wouldn't just like hand over their Bitcoin, but they would be, you know, ecstatic to do it. And they would be turning on their neighbors. They would be turning on their friends. We've seen it before. We've seen it play out. When you own the propaganda, you can control people's minds. And today they still own that propaganda. And again, in a decade or two from now, I have no idea what the world's going to look like. I don't see this as a real possibility, but it's not 0% that this could happen. So you should be absolutely thinking about this. You should be doing everything that you possibly can to get your Bitcoin off the exchanges and into your own self-custody. And when it's in your self-custody, you should make sure that every possible threat model that you have a counter for. And this is not something that happens over a week or a month or even a year. This is like a longer term plan that you have to set in place. And you look at all of your different threat models, whether that's fire, flood, government seizure, home invasion, you unexpectedly dying. You look at all your different threat models and you make sure that you have a counter to all of that. And thankfully, there are things that can be done to significantly increase your odds of that. One would be multi-sig. You get your Bitcoin off the exchanges into a multi-sig setup. It's very hard for anybody to take that from you. It's very hard for you to lose that Bitcoin. I mean, you have to do it properly. It's not something that you do lightly because there are some very important factors within that and information you have to back up in case of recovery. But multi-sig is a very good option for that. It would pretty much eliminate any single point of failure and significantly increase your odds of having that Bitcoin in 20, 30, 50 years from now that the governments cannot touch. And then you start looking at multi-jurisdictional. Maybe you keep a device in this country. Maybe you send one to your friend or somebody you trust in this country. You start thinking about multi-jurisdictional, multi-sig setups. And then you start encrypting your backups using SuperBacked. And once you have it there, again, this is a very gradual and slow progression to get to that point, but that's going to protect you from all this. And it's not only that, because even if you went through all that trouble of putting it into a multi-sig like that, if Bitcoin were to get to that point, I think we'd be in some trouble. So it's first step is securing what you have. The next step is talking about this stuff and providing education in any possible way that you can to your friends, your family, and your network about the importance of Bitcoin and self-custody. Because it's the only asset that we can truly own. We can't own anything else. You might say, well, yeah, I have some land. Do you? What happens if you stop paying the property tax on that land? Do you really own it? What about gold and silver in my basement? Well, what if somebody comes to your house? How can you abstractly protect that gold or silver? You can't. If they want it, they're going to take it. That's what happened in 1933. That's the difference here, though, is that in 1933, we were talking about an asset that was just laying around that you could not abstractly hold in your head, essentially. But with Bitcoin, if you do it properly, not only can you own it in your head, you can disperse it in different locations while still maintaining ownership of that Bitcoin. Very important. And that might actually be the difference between this happening like it did in 1933 and not happening. But I would say the first step for you is just don't be the lowest hanging fruit. If you're watching this and you're like, well, I don't even know what a multi-sig is. You're talking way over my head. The first thing you need to do is just don't be the lowest hanging fruit, which is having it on the exchange. And having your Bitcoin on the exchange, it presents two kind of threats to you. The first one is that it's very easy for the government to call Coinbase or Kraken and say, Ken has been misbehaving, freeze his account. Sorry, Kraken writes to Ken. Unfortunately, we have received news from the government or word from the government. We are forced to suspend your account. Okay, well, your Bitcoin's gone. That's number one. That's the easiest thing they could do. They don't have to come to your house. They don't have to exert any physical force. That's the easiest one. Just seize your Bitcoin on the exchange. But the second one is that when you leave your Bitcoin on the exchange, it allows these big entities to manipulate the price. Because when the Bitcoin's held on an exchange, they can essentially just create this huge slush fund where there's some dollars, there's some Bitcoin, but until people actually request withdrawal of that Bitcoin, they can just keep it. They're happy with that. They can continue manipulating the price of Bitcoin. So taking your Bitcoin off the exchanges does two things. You're no longer the lowest hanging fruit. They have to work harder if they want to take your Bitcoin from you. Plus, it shows the scarcity of Bitcoin. When we start taking Bitcoin off the exchanges, it's harder for them to manipulate the price of it. And this is probably a bold claim, a bold prediction, but I really think that in a couple cycles from now or less, Bitcoin exchanges aren't going to exist anymore. Because nobody's going to trade fake money for real money at that point. And so what would be their use case? If nobody wants to exchange fiat for Bitcoin, there's no exchange anymore. There might be like a couple, but they're not going to be like they are today. That's what I think. And to get Bitcoin in the future, you're either going to have to work for it or you're going to have to mine. Either way, it's proof of work. You have to either add value to the world, earn Bitcoin, or you have to provide energy and electricity to the network, and you have a chance to win Bitcoin. So that's my thoughts on it. That was a long